While I stood beside my wife's casket, trying to say goodbye after 37 years of marriage, my phone started buzzing with alerts from the security system at our lake house. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I opened the camera feed and saw my own son standing on my porch with a locksmith, changing every lock on the house my wife and I had built together. He thought grief had made me too broken to fight back. He had no idea the sheriff would be walking back to that door with me. My name is Walter Mercer, but most people call me Walt. I am 62 years old, and I live in Knoxville, Tennessee. For most of my adult life, I owned a commercial plumbing company that handled restaurants, schools, and office buildings all across East Tennessee. I was never a loud man. I built my life by staying calm, keeping records, and solving problems one pipe, one invoice, and one promise at a time. My wife, Linda, was the soft part of that life. She could walk into a room and make people feel safe before she even said a word. We were married for 37 years, and in all that time, I never learned how to imagine a morning without her coffee cup beside mine. Even during her sickness, she worried more about me than herself. That was Linda. She could be hurting and still ask if I had eaten. The funeral was held in a small chapel in Knoxville on a gray Thursday morning. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and the whole room smelled like lilies and old wood. Our son, Ethan, sat in the front row with his wife, Marissa. He looked serious but not broken. I noticed that, though I tried not to judge him. Everyone grieves differently. That is what I told myself. Linda's sister, Grace Halley, stood close to me through the service. She had one hand wrapped around a tissue and the other resting gently on my arm, like she was afraid I might fall apart if she let go. I appreciated it, but I was not falling apart. Not yet. I had spent years handling emergencies at job sites, hospitals, banks, and courtrooms. I knew how to stand still when the ground under me felt weak. The pastor was speaking about Linda's kindness when my phone buzzed the first time. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again, and again. I looked down, expecting a message from someone who could not find the chapel. Instead, I saw 3 security alerts from the lake house near Norris Lake. Motion detected at front porch. Motion detected at side door. Motion detected at garage entry. A cold feeling moved through my chest. That lake house was supposed to be empty. Linda and I had built it slowly over 20 years. At first, it had been nothing more than a small cabin with bad insulation and a porch that leaned to one side. Over time, we fixed it, added rooms, planted trees, and turned it into the place where Linda said she could breathe better. I lowered my phone near my lap and opened the camera app. The live feed took a second to load. When it cleared, I saw a white work van parked in the gravel drive. A man in a dark jacket was standing at the front door with a tool bag. Beside him stood Ethan. For a moment, my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. Ethan leaned toward the man and pointed at the lock. His mouth moved like he was giving instructions. Then the locksmith knelt down and started removing the hardware from the front door. I sat frozen in the front pew while people behind me cried for my wife. Grace noticed my face before anyone else did. She leaned closer and whispered, "Walt, what is it?" I could not answer right away. My throat felt too tight. I turned the screen slightly so she could see. Her eyes narrowed and the color left her face. "Is that Ethan?" she whispered. I nodded once. The pastor kept talking. The room stayed quiet. Nobody else knew that while Linda's funeral was still happening, our only son was at her favorite place on earth, changing the locks. I looked over at the front row where Ethan was supposed to be sitting. His chair was empty now. Marissa was still there, her face calm, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She did not look surprised. She did not look confused. She looked like someone waiting for a plan to finish. That was the first moment I understood this was not grief. It was not confusion. It was not a misunderstanding. It was a move. I put my phone back in my jacket pocket and stood through the rest of the service without saying a word. People came up afterward and hugged me. They told me Linda had been a beautiful soul. They told me to call if I needed anything. I thanked them because that was what Linda would have wanted me to do. But inside, something quiet and heavy had shifted. I was still a husband saying goodbye to his wife, but I was also a father who had just watched his son cross a line that could never be uncrossed. The last guest left the cemetery just after noon. The rain had slowed to a mist, and the fresh dirt covering Linda's grave looked darker than the surrounding grass. I stood there for another minute with my hands in my coat pockets, staring at the flowers that covered her casket only an hour earlier. "I'll be back tomorrow," I whispered. "I promise." Grace walked quietly beside me toward my truck. Neither of us spoke until we were pulling out of the cemetery parking lot. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. We were both trying to make sense of what we had seen on my phone. Finally, Grace took a slow breath. "Walt, maybe there's an explanation." I kept my eyes on the road. "I hope there is. But I've spent 40 years running a business. People don't hire locksmiths by accident." Grace looked out the passenger window without answering. The drive from Knoxville to the lake house near Norris Lake usually brought Linda peace. She loved watching the city disappear behind us as the roads became narrower and the trees thicker. Every curve reminded me of her. Every hill carried another memory. About halfway there, my phone buzzed again. Another security alert. This time, I pulled into a small parking area overlooking the lake. I opened the camera app once more. The front porch camera showed the locksmith carrying a box filled with old locks. Ethan was holding a brand new set of keys. He smiled, tossed one into the air, caught it, and slipped it into his pocket. Then the camera feed switched to the driveway. Marissa had just arrived in her SUV. She stepped out carrying 2 cardboard boxes. Grace leaned closer. "What are those?" "I don't know." We watched as Ethan unlocked the front door with the new key and held it open. Marissa carried the boxes inside as if she already lived there. I zoomed in as much as the camera allowed. One box had kitchen supplies. The other looked like framed pictures. "They're moving in," Grace whispered. "No," I said quietly. "They're staging the house." She turned toward me. "What do you mean?" "I've sold enough commercial properties to recognize the signs. New locks, personal decorations, cleaning supplies. They want the place to look occupied." Grace's expression changed. "You think they're planning to sell it?" "I don't know yet." But deep inside, I already feared the answer. I started the truck again. The rest of the drive felt much longer than usual. Neither of us talked much. I kept replaying the camera footage in my head. Not once had Ethan looked nervous. Not once had he looked guilty. He acted like everything belonged to him. That bothered me more than anything else. When we finally turned onto the gravel road leading to the lake house, I noticed 2 unfamiliar vehicles parked outside. The locksmith's van was gone. Marissa's SUV remained. Ethan's pickup sat near the garage. The new brass lock on the front door reflected the afternoon sunlight. I parked without blocking anyone's vehicle. Grace gently touched my arm. "Promise me something." "What?" "Don't lose your temper." I looked at her. "You've known me for almost 40 years. "I know. That's why I'm asking." I nodded. "I won't." We walked toward the porch together. The closer I got, the more memories came rushing back. Linda painting the porch railing one summer, Ethan fishing off the dock as a little boy, family cookouts, birthday dinners, Christmas mornings by the fireplace. Every board beneath my feet had a story attached to it. Then I reached the front door. I pulled my key ring from my pocket. The old silver key Linda and I had carried for years slid into the lock. It stopped halfway. I tried again. Nothing. The key no longer fit. For the first time since Linda died, the reality finally hit me. Someone had locked me out of my own home. Grace quietly stepped back while I stood staring at the door. A few seconds later, footsteps echoed from inside. The deadbolt clicked. The door opened just enough for Ethan to step outside before pulling it shut behind him. He wasn't wearing a suit anymore. He had changed into jeans and a gray sweatshirt, as if the funeral had already become yesterday's news. He folded his arms. "I figured you'd come." I looked directly into his eyes. "Ethan." His face remained completely calm. "Dad." There wasn't a trace of sympathy in his voice. No apology, no embarrassment. Nothing. My eyes drifted toward the shiny new lock. "You changed them." "I did. While your mother's funeral was taking place." He shrugged. "It needed to be done." Grace gasped softly beside me. I ignored the comment and asked the only question that mattered. "Why?" Ethan let out a slow breath like he was explaining something obvious to a child. because this house isn't really yours anymore." For a brief second, the world around me seemed perfectly still. The wind stopped. The birds went quiet. Even the water behind the house felt silent. I studied my son's face carefully. He actually believed what he had just said. And somehow that hurt even more than watching him change the locks. I looked at Ethan for several seconds before saying anything. In all his 36 years, I had never seen that expression on his face. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was certainty. Somehow, my son had convinced himself that he was standing on the right side of this situation. I kept my voice steady. "What do you mean? It isn't mine anymore." Ethan slipped one hand into his pocket and glanced briefly toward the lake before looking back at me. "Mom wanted me to have it." Grace stared at him in disbelief. "Ethan," she said quietly, "your mother's funeral ended less than an hour ago." He barely acknowledged her. "This isn't about timing. It's about honoring what Mom wanted." I noticed he never actually looked me in the eye while saying those words. I had spent decades negotiating contracts and settling disputes between business partners. One habit stayed with me long after retirement. I paid close attention to what people avoided saying just as much as what they actually said. "You said your mother wanted you to have it," I replied. "Where's the paperwork?" His jaw tightened for just a moment. Then he reached into a leather folder sitting on a small table just inside the doorway. He stepped outside, closed the door behind him again, and handed me several sheets of paper. This was signed before she passed. I accepted the documents without rushing. Grace moved beside me so we could read them together. The first page appeared to be a property transfer agreement. It claimed Linda had voluntarily transferred her interest in the lake house to Ethan only a few weeks before her death. At first glance, everything looked official. Typed paragraphs, legal language, signatures, dates, but I didn't read documents the way most people did. I started with the details. The paper itself was ordinary printer paper instead of the heavier stock Rachel Donnelly usually used for estate documents. The margins looked slightly uneven. One paragraph was formatted differently from the rest. Then my eyes settled on Linda's signature. I must have seen my wife's signature thousands of times over 37 years. We signed mortgages together, tax returns, insurance forms, business papers, Christmas cards. Something was wrong. The signature looked close enough to fool a stranger. It would never fool me. Linda always wrote the final R in Mercer with a slight upward curve. This signature ended with a sharp downward stroke. A tiny difference. But it was enough. I slowly lowered the papers. "This isn't Linda's signature." Ethan crossed his arms. "It absolutely is." "No." "You think you know better than a legal document?" "I know my wife." Silence settled between us. Marissa opened the front door and stepped onto the porch. She closed it carefully behind her and stood beside Ethan. "I'm sorry you're upset, Walt," she said in a calm voice. "But Linda made her decision." I looked at her. "You were there when she supposedly signed this?" Marissa hesitated for half a second. "Yes." That hesitation was small. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. "When?" I asked. "It was about 3 weeks ago." I nodded once. 3 weeks ago. Linda had been in the hospital for most of that week receiving treatment. Rachel had visited her twice. Grace had visited nearly every day. I remembered because I had barely left her room except to shower and grab fresh clothes. The timeline didn't make sense. "I see," I said quietly. Ethan's confidence returned. "So now you understand." "No," I answered. "Now I have more questions." His expression hardened. "Dad, you need to let this go. I buried my wife today. And now you need to move forward." Grace couldn't stay silent anymore. "Move forward?" she asked sharply. "He's standing outside his own house because you changed the locks during your mother's funeral." Ethan turned toward her. "This is between me and Dad." "No," Grace replied. "Linda was my sister. You don't get to use her name to justify this." Ethan ignored her. He looked back at me and pointed toward the driveway. "You should leave." I didn't move. "This house belongs to me." "It belongs to me now." "No," I said evenly. "You believe it does." His patience finally broke. If you don't leave, I'll call the police." The words hung in the air. Grace looked stunned. I wasn't. I had expected something like this from the moment I watched him changing the locks. I folded the papers neatly and handed them back. "You don't need to call the police." A faint smile appeared on Ethan's face, as though he thought I had finally accepted defeat. I reached into my pocket, took out my phone, and unlocked it. "Because," I said, already scrolling through my contacts, "I'm going to call someone first." My thumb stopped on one name, Sheriff Dale Hargrove. I pressed the call button without taking my eyes off my son. Sheriff Dale Hargrove answered on the third ring. "Walt," he said, his voice immediately softer than usual. "I heard about Linda. I'm so sorry." "Thank you, Dale," I replied. "I wish I were calling for another reason." He was quiet for a moment. "What's happened?" I gave him the facts, one at a time. I told him I had received security alerts during Linda's funeral. I explained that I had watched Ethan hire a locksmith to replace every lock at the lake house. Then I told him my son was now refusing to let me enter the property, claiming ownership based on paperwork that looked suspicious. Dale didn't interrupt me. When I finished, he simply said, "Stay where you are. I'll be there as soon as I can." "I appreciate it." "I'd rather sort this out before somebody makes a mistake," he replied before ending the call. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Ethan let out a short laugh. "You really called the sheriff?" "I did." "You think that's going to help?" "I think the truth usually does." He shook his head. "Dad, you're making this harder than it has to be." I looked at him carefully. "No, Ethan. Someone already made it hard." The next 20 minutes felt unusually long. Nobody spoke much. Grace stood beside me on the porch, while Ethan and Marissa remained near the front door. Every few minutes, Ethan glanced toward the road, growing more impatient. Finally, a marked sheriff's SUV turned onto the gravel driveway. Sheriff Dale Hargrove stepped out wearing his tan uniform and brown campaign hat. He had known Linda and me for nearly 20 years. His wife had volunteered with Linda at a local charity, and he had hired my plumbing company more than once for county projects. He walked toward us without rushing. "Walt." "Dale." He removed his hat for a moment. "I'm truly sorry about Linda." "Thank you." Only after offering his condolences did he turn toward Ethan. "Ethan." "Sheriff." Dale looked from one face to the other. "Let's hear both sides." Ethan spoke first. "My mom transferred the lake house to me before she passed away. Dad doesn't want to accept it." He handed the same paperwork to the sheriff. Dale studied the pages without commenting. Then he looked at me. "Walt? I believe the document is false. The signature doesn't match Linda's. More importantly, I want to know who authorized changing the locks while I was attending my wife's funeral." Dale nodded thoughtfully. "Fair question." He took out a small notebook and wrote several notes before speaking again. "First things first." He stepped away from us and made a phone call from his patrol vehicle. The conversation lasted only a few minutes. When he returned, his expression had changed. "I've confirmed the current county property records." Ethan straightened confidently. "So you know it's mine." Dale looked directly at him. "No." The confidence disappeared from Ethan's face. "The official deed still lists Walt Mercer as a legal owner of this property." Nobody said a word. Dale continued calmly. "That means Mr. Mercer has every legal right to enter this house unless a court orders otherwise." Ethan pointed toward the papers. "But I showed you the transfer. You showed me an unsigned filing." "What?" Dale held up the document. "I checked with the county recorder while I was on the phone. There has been no recorded transfer of ownership." Marissa suddenly stepped forward. "Maybe it just hasn't been filed yet." "Maybe," Dale answered evenly. "But until it is legally recorded and verified, the existing deed controls." Ethan's frustration became obvious. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying you had no legal authority to lock a deeded owner out of this property." For the first time that afternoon, Ethan looked uncertain. I was protecting the house. "From whom?" Dale asked. "My father." The sheriff paused for a second before responding. "Your father has lived with and maintained this property for years." Ethan didn't answer. Dale looked toward the new lock. "Who hired the locksmith?" "I did." "Did you tell him you were the sole owner?" "Yes." "Were you?" Ethan remained silent. That silence answered the question. Dale took another note. Then he faced him directly. Here's what's going to happen. Everyone listened carefully. Mr. Mercer has the legal right to enter this home today. You're going to unlock the door and provide every new key that was made. Ethan's face turned red. This is ridiculous. No, Dale replied. This is the law. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Finally, Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out a ring of shiny brass keys, and unlocked the front door. Before stepping aside, he looked straight at me. You can walk back into this house, he said quietly, but don't fool yourself. His voice carried no anger now, only bitterness. Mom stopped trusting you long before she died. The words landed harder than I expected, not because I believed them, but because they were spoken by my own son. I walked through the doorway without answering, knowing something far more important than a lock had been broken that day. The house felt strangely unfamiliar the moment I stepped inside. Nothing appeared to be missing, yet everything felt different. The silence was heavier than it had ever been before. For years, Linda had filled these rooms with quiet life. She always had music playing softly while she cooked, or she would leave a book open on the coffee table because she planned to finish one more chapter before bed. Now all I could hear was the sound of my own footsteps. Sheriff Dale Hargrove remained near the front entrance for a few minutes while I walked through the living room. He simply wanted to make sure everything stayed peaceful. Ethan and Marissa stood outside on the porch without saying another word. I looked around carefully. The family photographs were still hanging on the walls. Linda's favorite rocking chair was still facing the lake. Her reading glasses still rested beside the lamp where she had left them before her final trip to the hospital. Then I noticed something new. Several framed photographs had been moved from the fireplace mantel. In their place sat decorative candles that had never belonged there. I turned toward the front door. Grace. She stepped inside. Do you remember those family pictures? She looked at the mantel and frowned. They were here this morning. I nodded. So someone already started changing the house. Grace slowly shook her head. I can't believe this. Sheriff Hargrove walked over. If you notice anything missing, make a list. Don't move anything yet. If this becomes a legal matter, documentation will help. I understand, I replied. A few minutes later, Dale wished me well and left after reminding everyone to avoid creating any further conflict. Ethan and Marissa climbed into their SUV without another conversation. They drove away slowly, leaving the fresh tire tracks behind in the gravel. For the first time all day, the property was quiet. Grace and I sat down in the living room without speaking. Neither of us had the energy to clean, organize, or even make coffee. The emotional weight of the funeral had finally caught up with us. After several minutes, Grace reached into her purse. There was something Linda asked me to do. I looked at her. She carefully removed a large cream-colored envelope. My name was written across the front in Linda's handwriting. For Walt. My chest tightened. She gave me this about 2 months ago, Grace said softly. She told me not to give it to you unless she wasn't here anymore. I stared at the envelope for several seconds before taking it. You knew about this? I knew she wanted you to have it. I never asked what was inside. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the seal. Inside was a handwritten letter. The first line alone nearly broke me. My dearest Walt, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't stay with you as long as we both hoped. I had to stop for a moment. Grace quietly looked away to give me privacy. After taking a deep breath, I continued reading. Linda wrote about our life together, about the business we had built, the vacations we never regretted taking, and how grateful she was that we had chosen each other all those years ago. Then the tone of the letter changed. There is something I've been afraid to tell you because I didn't want to add more stress while I was sick. I immediately sat up straighter. Ethan has been asking me for money and property for several months. At first, I believed he was just worried about his future, but eventually, the conversations became demands. I felt my stomach sink. Grace watched my expression carefully. What is it? I swallowed hard before answering. You were right. About what? There wasn't any misunderstanding. I continued reading. Linda explained that Ethan had repeatedly pressured her to sign papers involving the lake house. Every time she refused, he insisted that he deserved it because he was their only child. She wrote that Marissa had joined several of those conversations and encouraged Ethan not to wait forever. My hands tightened around the pages. Then I reached another paragraph. I never signed anything giving Ethan the lake house. In fact, I became so concerned that I asked Rachel Donnelly to update every estate document we had. She has everything you need. Please trust her completely. At the bottom of the page, Linda had written one final request. Don't let guilt stop you from protecting yourself. Loving our son doesn't mean accepting his choices. If he betrays you, let the truth speak for itself. Tears blurred the words. Not because I had discovered Ethan's betrayal, but because Linda had carried this burden alone while fighting for her life. She had spent her final months trying to protect me instead of asking me to protect her. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. Grace finally spoke. What are you going to do? I looked out the window toward the lake, where Linda and I had spent countless peaceful evenings together. Tomorrow morning, I said quietly, I'm going to see Rachel Donnelly. If Linda prepared something... I paused, thinking about the forged documents still in Ethan's hands. Then it's time to find out exactly what she was trying to protect. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda's handwriting. Then it would change into the image from the security camera, Ethan standing on the front porch, while a locksmith removed the locks we had chosen together years earlier. By sunrise, I had already made coffee, showered, and organized everything I planned to take with me. I placed Linda's letter in a folder along with copies of the security alerts, screenshots from the camera system, and the suspicious property transfer Ethan had shown me. Old habits die hard. When I owned my plumbing company, I never walked into a meeting relying on memory. If I believed something mattered, I documented it. At 9 o'clock sharp, I parked outside Rachel Donnelly's office in downtown Knoxville. Rachel had handled our estate planning for more than 15 years. She was careful, organized, and never rushed anyone into making legal decisions. Linda trusted her completely, which was enough for me. Rachel greeted me personally in the reception area. Walt, she said gently, shaking my hand. I wish we were meeting under better circumstances. So do I. She led me into her office and waited until the door was closed before speaking again. I received Grace's message last night. I nodded. Linda left me a letter. Rachel's expression softened. Then she wanted you to know the truth. I placed the envelope on her desk. She said you updated our estate documents. I did. Rachel opened a locked file cabinet behind her desk and removed a thick folder labeled Mercer Family Estate. She laid several documents on the desk one at a time. About 4 months ago, she explained, Linda requested a private meeting. I listened carefully. She told me Ethan had begun pressuring her to transfer ownership of the lake house. Did she ever agree to it? Rachel answered without hesitation. Absolutely not. A weight I hadn't realized I was carrying lifted slightly from my shoulders. Instead of handing over the property, Rachel explained, Linda had asked for additional legal protection. She showed me a trust agreement bearing both my signature and Linda's genuine signature. I remember signing this, I said. Rachel smiled slightly. You signed it together in this office. I studied the document. It clearly stated that after Linda's death, I would remain the lifetime beneficiary and sole decision-maker regarding the lake house. No transfer or sale could happen without my written approval. So Ethan never became the owner? No. Not even partially? No. Rachel slid another document toward me. This is the certified copy recorded with the county. Every page carried official filing stamps. Unlike the papers Ethan had shown me, these had been legally recorded weeks before Linda passed away. I quietly leaned back in my chair. So he either doesn't understand the law, or he hoped you wouldn't, Rachel finished. I reached into my folder and handed her Ethan's property transfer papers. I need your opinion. Rachel adjusted her glasses and carefully examined every page. She spent several minutes reading without saying a word. Then she looked directly at me. Walt. She tapped the signature line. This is not Linda's signature. I knew it. I did too the moment I saw it. She continued studying the document. There are other problems. She pointed to the notary section. The notary registration number listed here expired over a year ago. I frowned. So whoever prepared this used invalid information. She pointed again. The witness signatures are also incomplete. What does that mean? It means this document wouldn't survive serious legal scrutiny. I slowly exhaled. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something stronger than grief. Clarity. Rachel closed the folder. We're not finished. She opened another file. Linda also left detailed notes about her conversations with Ethan. Inside were dated summaries Rachel had written after each meeting with Linda. Every note described the same pattern. Ethan asking for money. Ethan demanding the lake house. Ethan insisting he deserved it because he was their only child. One note stood out. It had been written only 6 weeks before Linda died. Rachel read it aloud. Client reports son requested immediate transfer of lake house. Client refused. Client expressed concern son may attempt to obtain property through improper means. Rachel looked up. Linda specifically asked me to preserve these notes. I stared silently at the pages. She had known, not every detail, but enough to realize something was coming. Rachel gently closed the file. Now we need to protect the evidence. Together we made a list. The complete security footage from every camera at the lake house. The locksmith's invoice showing who hired him. Copies of every text message between Ethan and Linda discussing the property. Bank records proving no legal purchase had ever occurred. Hospital records establishing Linda's medical condition on the date Ethan claimed she signed the transfer. County property records confirming ownership. Rachel looked at me. One more thing. What? Do not confront Ethan again until we've secured everything. I nodded. I won't. As I gathered my papers, Rachel's office phone rang. She answered briefly, listened for less than a minute, then slowly looked at me. Walt. Her expression had changed. I think we've just discovered something even bigger. I felt my stomach tighten. What happened? Rachel lowered the phone. A local title company just called. She paused. Someone contacted them 3 days before Linda's funeral, asking how quickly the lake house could be sold. For a few seconds, I simply stared at Rachel. I wasn't sure I had heard her correctly. 3 days before the funeral? I asked. Rachel nodded. That's what they told me. I slowly sat back down. Linda had still been alive 3 days before her funeral. She had been weak, but she was alive. While I was spending every possible hour beside her hospital bed, someone had already been asking how quickly our lake house could be sold. Who called the title company? I asked. They couldn't give me every detail over the phone, Rachel replied. But they confirmed the inquiry came from someone claiming to represent the future owner. The future owner, I repeated quietly. Rachel folded her hands on the desk. They became concerned after hearing about Linda's death because they remembered the timing. When they learned I handled your estate planning, they contacted me. I rubbed my forehead. So Ethan wasn't just trying to get into the house. Rachel looked directly at me. No. He was preparing to sell it. The room became very quiet. I thought about the fresh locks, the boxes Marissa had carried inside, and the decorative items replacing our family photographs. None of it had been random. It had all been preparation. Rachel reached for a notepad. We need to move quickly but carefully. She immediately drafted a notice to the title company explaining that ownership of the property was disputed and that no transfer should proceed without verification. She also prepared letters for the county recorder and another notice to place everyone on alert regarding any attempted sale involving the lake house. Watching her work reminded me why Linda trusted her. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was rushed. When the paperwork was finished, Rachel looked back at me. Walt, I have another question. Go ahead. Has Ethan been having financial problems? I thought about it. He always lived beyond his paycheck. What do you mean? He and Marissa bought a larger house than they could comfortably afford. Then came expensive vacations, luxury vehicles, private school plans, and constant remodeling projects. Rachel nodded slowly. I've seen situations like this before. You think debt is driving this? It's possible. I left her office that afternoon with copies of every document we had discussed. Instead of driving straight home, I stopped for coffee at a quiet diner outside Knoxville. For the first time in days, I wasn't thinking only as a grieving husband. I was thinking like the business owner I had once been. Every fraud leaves a trail. Every desperate decision creates another piece of evidence. The question wasn't whether Ethan had left evidence. The question was where. The next morning, Rachel called before 8. "I have something. I'm listening." The title company found additional records. "What kind?" "They kept notes from the original phone conversation." My pulse quickened. "And?" Rachel took a breath. The caller wasn't acting alone. I remained silent. The notes mentioned that a husband and wife planned to list the property immediately after taking possession. Husband and wife. Yes. I didn't need her to say the names. I already knew. Ethan and Marissa. Rachel continued. The employee also remembered something else because it struck her as unusual. What was it? The caller asked whether they could complete a private sale without notifying other family members. I closed my eyes. That wasn't someone trying to settle an estate. That was someone trying to hide a sale. Rachel emailed me copies of the title company's written notes along with the employee's contact information. By lunchtime, another piece of the puzzle appeared. The locksmith's office responded to Rachel's request. Their invoice listed Ethan Mercer as the customer. It included the exact date, the exact time, and payment made with Ethan's personal credit card. Even more important, the work order contained a handwritten statement. Customer stated he was the property owner and requested immediate lock replacement due to family access issues. I read that sentence 3 times. He hadn't simply changed the locks. He had falsely represented himself as the owner to make it happen. That afternoon, Rachel called again. This one concerns me the most. What is it? I found public financing records. I waited. They're connected to Ethan. She continued carefully. Over the past year, he applied for several personal loans. So? According to the applications, he listed an expected inheritance from the lake house as a future financial asset. I felt my chest tighten. He borrowed money. Based on property he didn't own, Rachel finished. And now those loans are coming due. Exactly. Everything suddenly made sense. The timing, the forged paperwork, the locks, the planned sale. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was desperation. Ethan hadn't tried to steal the lake house because he wanted a vacation home. He needed money, a lot of it. And somewhere, someone was waiting to be paid. Rachel's voice became serious. Walt, from this point forward, every conversation, every document, and every piece of evidence matters. I looked out my kitchen window toward the distant hills. I understand. No more assumptions. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Only facts. That was exactly how I had run my business for 40 years. And now, it was exactly how I intended to protect the last dream Linda and I had built together. A week after Linda's funeral, Ethan called me for the first time. His voice sounded calm, almost friendly. Dad, I'm putting together a small memorial gathering for Mom this Saturday at the lake house. Just close family. I think it's what she would have wanted. For a few seconds, I didn't answer. The same lake house he had tried to lock me out of. The same place he had nearly sold before Linda was even buried. What time? I finally asked. 2 in the afternoon. I'll be there. When I hung up, I didn't feel invited. I felt positioned. Less than 10 minutes later, I called Rachel Donnelly. He wants the family together at the lake house. I suspected something like this, she replied. You think it's another move? I do. If Ethan believes everyone will naturally sympathize with him, he'll probably try to control the story before the legal process catches up with him. Grace agreed. He'll make himself look like the caring son and make you look like the angry father. I nodded. Then we let him talk. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Walt, don't argue with him in front of everyone. I won't. Let him finish. And then? Then we present facts. That was exactly how business disputes had always been handled. The loudest person rarely won. The person with the evidence usually did. Over the next several days, Rachel continued organizing every piece of documentation. She obtained certified copies of the trust agreement. She secured the county property records. She preserved the complete security footage from every camera at the lake house. The locksmith provided a sworn written statement confirming Ethan had identified himself as the owner when requesting the lock replacement. The title company employee also agreed to provide a written statement describing the phone call about selling the property before Linda's funeral. Everything was falling into place. Rachel kept reminding me of one thing. Don't think emotionally when you walk into that gathering. I'll try. No, she corrected gently. Don't try. Decide now. She was right. Linda had always admired my ability to stay calm under pressure. If I lost control now, Ethan could point to my emotions instead of the facts. Saturday arrived with clear skies over Norris Lake. Grace rode with me. Neither of us spoke much during the drive. As we pulled into the driveway, several vehicles were already parked outside. A few relatives stood on the porch talking quietly. Inside the house, someone had arranged framed photographs of Linda across the living room. At first glance, everything looked respectful, but something felt wrong. Too polished, too carefully staged. Ethan greeted people at the front door, shaking hands and thanking them for coming. When he saw me, he forced a small smile. I'm glad you came. I wouldn't have missed remembering your mother. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. Then I walked past him into the house. Family members hugged me, offered condolences, and shared memories of Linda. I appreciated every one of them. She deserved to be remembered with love. About 30 minutes later, everyone gathered in the living room. Ethan stood near the fireplace. I just want to say a few words about Mom. The room became quiet. He spoke about her kindness, her generosity, her love for family. Everything sounded sincere. Then his tone slowly changed. I know the last week has been difficult. Several people nodded. There have been disagreements. He glanced toward me. I don't want anyone choosing sides. Neither did I. But, he continued, sometimes grief affects people differently. I remained silent. He looked around the room. Dad has had a hard time accepting some of Mom's final decisions. A few relatives exchanged confused looks. I understand why he's upset, Ethan said, but Mom trusted me to take care of this place after she was gone. Grace shifted beside me but said nothing. I never wanted conflict, Ethan continued. I only wanted to honor what Mom asked me to do. He paused dramatically before adding one final sentence. I hope everyone can respect her wishes, even if Dad can't. The room fell completely silent. Every eye slowly turned toward me. Ethan believed he had won. He believed the story was now his. He had no idea Rachel, Sheriff Dale Hargrove, and I had agreed not to interrupt him, because sometimes the strongest evidence becomes even more powerful, after every lie has already been told. No one spoke for several long seconds after Ethan finished. The room was so quiet that I could hear the grandfather clock in the corner ticking away. I looked around at the faces of our relatives. Some looked confused. Others looked sympathetic toward Ethan because they had only heard one side of the story. I slowly stood. I'd like to say something. Nobody objected. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shaking. I simply walked to the front of the room, stood beside the fireplace where Linda and I had spent countless evenings together, and faced my family. I came here today to remember my wife. I paused. I didn't come here to argue with my son. Ethan folded his arms. Then don't. I ignored the comment. I've spent my entire life believing that facts matter more than emotions. Linda believed the same thing. Just then, someone knocked on the front door. Every head turned. Grace quietly walked over and opened it. Attorney Rachel Donnelly stepped inside carrying a leather briefcase. Behind her stood Sheriff Dale Hargrove. Neither of them said a word until Grace invited them in. Several relatives looked surprised. Ethan's confident expression faded. Dad, he said carefully. What is this? I answered calmly. The truth. Rachel walked into the living room and placed her briefcase on the dining table. I apologize for interrupting your gathering, she said politely, but Mr. Mercer asked me to present several legal documents concerning the ownership of this property. Ethan immediately stepped forward. That's unnecessary. Rachel looked at him. No, it isn't. She opened the briefcase and removed a certified copy of the trust agreement. This document was signed by Walter and Linda Mercer in my office 4 months before Linda's passing. She handed copies to several family members. It establishes Mr. Walter Mercer as the lifetime beneficiary and sole decision-maker regarding this lake house. A murmur spread through the room. Rachel continued. This trust was legally recorded before Linda passed away. Ethan spoke quickly. Mom changed her mind afterward. Rachel looked directly at him. If she had, there would be legally recorded documentation. She paused. There isn't. Ethan reached into a cabinet and pulled out the same property transfer papers he had shown me days earlier. What about these? Rachel accepted them without hesitation. I've already examined this document. She held it beside Linda's genuine signature from the trust paperwork. The signatures do not match. Several relatives leaned closer. Rachel pointed to the differences one by one. Then she pointed to the notary section. The registration number belongs to a commission that expired more than a year before this document was supposedly signed. The room became silent again. Ethan's face turned pale. Rachel wasn't finished. She removed another folder. This is the locksmith's invoice. She handed it to Sheriff Hargrove. Dale read aloud. Customer, Ethan Mercer. He continued reading. Customer identified himself as the property owner and requested immediate replacement of all exterior locks. The sheriff lowered the paper. Mr. Mercer, were you the legal owner that day? Ethan didn't answer. Rachel calmly produced another document. This is a written statement from the title company. She looked around the room. 3 days before Linda Mercer's funeral, someone contacted them asking how quickly this lake house could be sold. Gasps filled the room. Rachel continued. The caller also asked whether the sale could proceed without notifying other family members. Marissa suddenly stood. This is ridiculous. Rachel turned toward her. The title company employee specifically remembered speaking with both a husband and wife. Marissa slowly sat back down. Nobody defended her. I reached into my inside jacket pocket. There is one more thing. Every eye shifted toward me. I carefully removed Linda's letter. This was written by my wife before she died. My voice nearly broke, but I continued. She asked Grace to give it to me only after her passing. I unfolded the pages and read the section that mattered most. Ethan has been asking me for money and property for several months. He has pressured me repeatedly to transfer the lake house. I refused. No one moved. I never signed anything giving Ethan this house. Rachel has updated every legal document. If he betrays you, let the truth speak for itself. When I finished reading, I folded the letter carefully. Nobody spoke, not even Ethan. After nearly a minute, one of our relatives quietly asked him a single question. Did you really try to sell your mother's house before she was buried? Ethan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His silence answered more honestly than any explanation ever could. The silence that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. No one rushed to defend Ethan. No one argued with Rachel. No one questioned Sheriff Hargrove or the documents spread across the dining table. Every piece of evidence supported the next one, leaving no room for excuses. Ethan looked around the room as if he expected someone to rescue him. Nobody did. Marissa reached for his arm, but he quietly pulled away. For the first time since Linda's funeral, he looked frightened instead of confident. Sheriff Hargrove stepped forward. Ethan, he said in a calm, professional voice, I'm not here to arrest anyone today. This is primarily a civil property matter. However, the documents presented raise serious concerns. Any evidence of forgery or false representations may be referred to the proper investigators. Ethan swallowed hard. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone, Rachel answered before I could. Intent doesn't erase actions. She closed her briefcase. You attempted to take control of property that did not belong to you. You presented a document with multiple legal defects. You represented yourself as the owner to a locksmith, and evidence suggests preparations were made to sell the property before Linda Mercer was even buried. No one argued with her. One by one, our relatives quietly gathered their coats. Several stopped beside me before leaving. I'm sorry, Walt. We had no idea. Linda would be heartbroken. I thanked each of them. There was no satisfaction in seeing my son exposed. The truth needed to come out, but that didn't make it painless. Within half an hour, the gathering had ended. Only a handful of us remained in the living room. Rachel informed me that she would immediately begin the civil process to invalidate the forged document permanently and file the necessary notices protecting the property. The title company had already frozen any possible transfer, and the county records clearly supported the trust Linda had created. A few weeks later, the legal process moved exactly as Rachel predicted. The court recognized the trust as valid. The forged transfer document carried no legal authority. The attempted sale was permanently blocked. The locksmith's records, security footage, title company notes, and Rachel's files all supported the same timeline. Together, they painted a clear picture of what had happened. Separate from the property dispute, the questionable paperwork was referred for further review by the appropriate authorities. Whatever decisions followed would happen through the legal system, not through revenge. That was enough for me. Ethan also faced another problem. The loans he had taken based on his claimed future ownership quickly became impossible to manage once it became clear he had no legal claim to the lake house. The financial foundation he had built on false assumptions collapsed. Not long afterward, Marissa moved out. I didn't celebrate it. A broken marriage wasn't justice. It was another consequence of choices that never should have been made. Months passed before Ethan finally called me. His voice sounded very different. There was no confidence left. "Dad." I waited. "I'm sorry." The words were quiet, almost uncertain. "I don't expect you to forgive me." I looked across the porch toward the water before answering. "Forgiveness and trust aren't the same thing, Ethan." "I know. You made your decisions." "I did. I hope you learn from them." Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Then he quietly said goodbye. It wasn't a perfect ending. Real life rarely gives those. The following spring, I returned to the lake house alone for the first full weekend since Linda's passing. Everything looked almost exactly the way we had left it. The porch swing creaked gently in the breeze. The water reflected the afternoon sun. The trees she loved were beginning to bloom again. I carried one item with me: Linda's letter. I sat in her favorite rocking chair and read every word one more time. This time I smiled through the tears. She hadn't only protected the lake house, she had protected me. She knew grief could cloud judgment. She knew I might hesitate to believe our own son could betray us. That was why she quietly prepared everything before she was gone. Not because she expected revenge, because she believed the truth deserved a chance to stand on its own. A few months later, I established a small family retreat policy for the property. The lake house would always remain a place where relatives could gather, celebrate milestones, and remember Linda, but only if they came with respect, honesty, and kindness. The house was never about money. It was never about ownership. It was about the life Linda and I built together, one careful step at a time. As the sun began to set over Norris Lake, I folded her letter, slipped it back into its envelope, and looked across the quiet water. For the first time since the funeral, the lake house truly felt like home again. Thank you for listening. This story reminds us that love and trust should go hand in hand, but when trust is broken, the truth still matters. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven your son? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe for more emotional family revenge stories. Until next time, take care and never underestimate the power of the truth.